of interactions and meetings that are going to be taking place, and a whole bunch of additional work still that needs to be done as a part of filing what we call the final license application. Doesn't mean that everything is final. All right, this is the issue tracking list that was included in the August 9th list. It's so small you probably can't see it, but let's cover these items as part of an update here, and that's primarily what we're here for tonight. So the issue tracking list that Jeremy works off of, and that you guys have endorsed as issue tracking for the project, includes additional baseline studies, hydrogeologic study. As I mentioned, there's an SF-299 application that's been filed with the BLM. We have additional information that we need to provide for them so that they can further that application process. There was a second item that was the flood analysis and study in case of a dam breach. That item has been addressed within the final license application. There is a preliminary supporting design report that's been filed with Exhibit F of the FLA that has done an analysis on the crest parapet levels and the dam crest levels for both static conditions and for high wind conditions. And it concludes that the freeboard for the design dam crest parapet levels and a dam crest level for each reservoir are appropriate, and that the upper reservoir in particular meets the FERC dam safety criteria by preventing potential overtopping failure modes through containment of all potential overtopping water within the reservoir. The freeboard itself is a part of the dam safety criteria. Nonetheless, the final design criteria will be reviewed by the FERC Board of Consultants, and a dam safety review will be conducted during the license application review process. As I mentioned, we completed seismic studies that were due to localized faulting and determined that the information is a part of a geotechnical seismic design report that's also included in the FLA as a supporting document to the preliminary supporting design report. There's also a geotechnical design report that was issued as a part of an addendum to the preliminary supporting design report that was also filed as Exhibit F in the FLA. All right, secondly, in the issues tracking list, the FERC listing had to do with stakeholder comments from the DLA to whether or not they have been addressed in the FLA. That's included in Exhibit E of the FLA under Attachment L. And so those responses and those comment responses, those will be evaluated by the FERC to determine whether or not we adequately address the comments, and they will be a part of the overall review that they have to go through. Socioeconomic assessment, I had mentioned before, the tax, the property tax payments that is estimated based on socioeconomic assessments, whether or not they included the tax payments, and I already mentioned that. There is a supplemental socioeconomic assessment that we are preparing this year with additional information that's being provided by the Northern Nevada Railway. The plans for completion of the supplementary report and that plan for completion of that report has been reviewed with the National Park Service. Sorry, I've got a janitorial service in the background here. I hope you can hear me. The third item here is recreational access plan. This is addressed in the FLA in Exhibit E, Section 3.8.2, which you can see in there. And that it has been updated to reflect there will not be any permanent restriction on public access for recreational purposes to public lands around the project area. As an example, the Ridgeline Trail at the top of Duck Creek Ridge has been proposed to be reconfigured to avoid the footprint of the upper reservoir during both the construction and operation to ensure that no access restrictions will be encountered for recreational purposes. You'll still be able to drive along the Ridgeline Trail at the top, even during construction, and we've reconfigured that to avoid that so that there will be a special allowance for that. And that, but we do propose to manage lands over which we have control in the project footprint for appropriate public access. That would prohibit fishing and other recreation in the reservoir, which you can probably imagine. We're not going to have fish in there. Hopefully we won't have fish in there at any point in the future. And they'll be fenced around both reservoirs with wildlife protection fences. We're proposing 10-foot fences around both of the reservoirs, so restrict access for both the public and for security and safety concerns, but also to prevent wildlife from encroaching or gaining access to the reservoirs. An access plan will be developed for construction in partnership and coordination with the selected engineering and procurement contractor, EPC contractor, and in consultation with the county and the BLM. There is a draft invasive and noxious weed management plan that has been prepared, and we will be finalizing that in partnership and in coordination with White Pine County and with the BLM. The wildlife mitigation plan, we have proposed and requested that the BLM and NDOW, that they convene a technical working group for evaluation of the mitigation measures that will be necessary in order to be able to gain an exception or a waiver to the resource management plan. Those are our existing rules that allow you for specifically kinds of species of concern that you can gain an exception or waiver if you have an adequate amount of mitigation measures as a part of that. We will be engaging with the BLM and the NDOW and a number of other agencies. And Jeremy, just to let you know, I didn't mention this to you on the phone a couple of weeks ago. The BLM has requested that the county be represented on that technical working group, and they've specifically suggested that you would be a good representative for that. So I'm just passing that along. The fencing design was also raised as a point on the issue tracking list. I just mentioned that has been proposed as a fence design, and it's included in the FLA. And revegetation in the pond embankment, the intent is they'll be revegetated, and the specific species that will be revegetated will be the natural species that exist, and we'll have a vegetation monitoring plan that will allow for reseeding periodically until that vegetation takes place on the side of the embankment so that it blends in with the natural environment. Updated mapping. You probably are aware that we have, we've already initiated the engagement with the Nevada Department of Transportation on the access permit requirements for the access road for the project. There will be turnout lanes that will be designed, and there will be permitted turnout lanes and acceleration lanes for the access so that there will be no interruption of traffic, so that it will be limited and minimize the amount of traffic impact for access off the highway to the project. There is also, as part of the request, was to have the surface ownership identified. We have sent out a copy of the Exhibit G maps for the land ownership maps to all of the directly affected landowners for the project and a lot of other stakeholders that are a part of that. We sent that out by certified mail, and the Exhibit G is a part of the FLA for anyone who might want to delve into that. The construction, staging, and storage areas are also now included in Exhibit F of the FLA. I've only got one more slide for the updates. We currently have started engagement with the county on the development of a White Pine County development agreement that will include a lot of key elements that are special and near and dear to the constituency in White Pine County. We already have in place a road agreement for road access and road maintenance, and the question about a reclamation bond is one that will be discussed with White Pine County during those discussions with the development agreement. Since there is no FERC requirement for a reclamation bond, the caution is that the county will be taking that on as a part of those discussions for the development agreement. This is the second to last one, so bear with me. The FERC review bill final license application for acceptance is what we are expecting in the next 6 months. That includes a couple of different elements there's been some confusion around. We have applied for what's called a FAST 41 for large infrastructure projects that's allowed by federal process. That is an intra-government agency process that allows for coordination between various federal agencies and state agencies that will allow for coordination of the activities and the review. There is an expedited license process for a closed loop system, which we included in the cover letter for the final license application. That's an inter-FERC process that allows for an expedited review process that does not neglect and it does not set aside any of the NEPA process. It just means they have to pay attention to the application, and based on our experience with the Seminole project, it appears that the FERC is honoring that requirement for an expedited license process. And by the way, just to clarify, the expedited license process is only for closed loop systems. The Seminole project is an open loop system and doesn't qualify for the expedited license process. There are no pump storage projects that have applied to the FERC for a license that have ever qualified for an expedited license process, and we're looking forward to seeing whether or not the FERC will approve this one. They have about 180 days from when the license was applied in order to make that determination. The NEPA process will start by the FERC upon license acceptance, and after we have answered any questions that they might have. There is an update to the BLM right-of-way application, the SF-299 application, and land use application that will be updating within the next couple of weeks and submitting to the BLM. We need to continue to work with private landowners on the long-term agreements for access, and also, as mentioned, the development services agreement with White Pine County. And then we're going to continue to work with state and federal agencies on additional and supplemental cultural, socioeconomic, and environmental topics. We cannot, and the process with the final license application formalizes our contacts and our submittals with FERC. So that has basically come to a closed door status, but we have the opportunity and we invite the opportunity to continue to work with state and federal agencies other than the FERC on any additional supplemental cultural, socioeconomic, or environmental topics. Lastly, we've already mentioned the mitigation plan that will be developed as a part of the discussions with the BLM and NDOW for the greater sage-grouse and ungulate winter range. And we've requested that the BLM convene a technical working group for an exceptional waiver to the resource management plan going forward. And thank you, and these are contact information. I'm going to close this slide and take any questions you might have.
We'll start and see, is there any questions from anybody on the phone? Anybody have questions?
Yeah, I got about 4. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
If you don't get an exception or waiver to the sage-grouse management plan, is that a deal breaker?
Not necessarily. There are a variety of different ways of addressing the issue. Certainly, and most importantly, the mitigation for sage-grouse is an important thing that I think that a lot of invested stakeholders are interested in.
So you think there's multiple ways to get around it?
No, not to get around it, to address it. And mitigation can take on several different facets, both habitat enhancement and mitigation for the actual sage-grouse themselves. And habitat enhancement in and of itself can be considerable and can be very helpful in terms of creating a net positive effect for sage-grouse in the area.
Moving on, you mentioned the highway, the Department of Transportation or someone in your employ is going to widen the highway and put speed up, slow down, turn out lanes next to the project?
That will be an application that will be submitted to the Nevada Department of Transportation, who will stipulate the conditions that are necessary in order for that to be put in place. That construction will be paid for by the project, and it will be permitted by the Nevada Department of Transportation based on their specifications.
All right, you mentioned the Upper Reservoir Access Road. Is that a finalized done deal or is that still proposed?
That route selection, it has yet to have some ground truthing that's required. It will be revised slightly, I think, from where it's, from where it's finally designed. But for right now, we're probably at 90% of the design. There is, again, like I said, some ground truthing that's gonna be required, but in general, it looks to be a pretty good route, to be honest with you.
And you mentioned that it would be open to the public during construction as well? The road, that is?
That's an interesting question. There's one line of thought that we should close that access road because the potential for increasing public access to sensitive habitat areas to allow even more people to visit those areas might be an environmental issue or environmental concern. On the other hand, from a recreational standpoint, we see a lot of value for being able to allow people to go up there. So one of the things that we're looking at is whether or not there is seasonal access or time of day access to that might be appropriate so that it doesn't cause untoward kind of effects from an environmental standpoint to wildlife, but yet still allows for recreational access on a reasonable basis.
Because I believe there's only one bridge road on the top up there, if I'm not mistaken. You mentioned, or I read in the handout, 25 miles of new transmission line construction. This is a new one on us, I believe. We thought you might look into a substation or...
The Genti line, it actually runs immediately adjacent to and next to the currently existing NV energy line. So it doesn't create any new surface disturbance or linear disturbance that doesn't already exist. It expands it or makes it a little bit wider.
That's the entire line?
And one thing to note here, and I think it's something worthwhile for Jeremy to know, is that we've already budgeted in perch arresters as a part of that, so that anywhere near any kind of existing or newly identified nesting locations for either sage grouse or other prey source for raptors, with the actual perching arresters will help in limiting the amount of prey impacts that would be apparent otherwise.
It's 25 miles.
By the way, I don't think that the NV energy line has any of that currently existing on there.
25 miles get you all the way to Robinson, or is that just part of the way?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Does the 25 miles get you all the way to Robinson Sub, or is there someplace else that you're gonna hook in?
No, the 25 miles goes all the way to Robinson Summit.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? I have a couple, but I want to make sure everybody.
Mr. Chairman, this is Gary.
Go ahead, Gary.
Just a real quick question. Is there gonna be any water treatment, the water meant for the chemicals or anything like that?
Actually, it's a very good question. I have an intern who's actually working on exactly that as a part of a study request that I have with him. That if a closed loop system over time actually will increase the mineral buildup in the water. And whether or not we precipitate those minerals out and remove them, or whether we periodically, it looks like it would be on a cycle of about 10 years, hook up a temporary water treatment system to demineralize the water is something that we're actually considering. He's running some calculations to see what that buildup rate would be for this kind of a system.
I'm just kind of curious, what kind of chemicals would be involved with that and how that's gonna be handled.
Well, the water that will be in the reservoirs will be groundwater. So depending on the hardness of the water and the source of the water that we have, will largely depend on the buildup rate. So he's developing a spreadsheet that will actually be able to allow us, once we do the hydrogeologic testing, to plug in the sample results so that we can see what the potential buildup rate would be over time. We don't expect that to be something that's going to happen very often, and generally it's like a 10-year cycle for other projects, similar size projects.
Thank you.
Is there any other questions? Go ahead, Bill.
Great, on the Number 21, the NRIC issue tracking list. The items in category number 1 there, the additional baseline studies, would we have access, is that information included in the FERC filing, and would we have access to see what actually is in those reports?
So there's two parts to the final license application filing that are considered under the Patriot Act that are considered critical energy infrastructure information. And access to that information, we had to file that under a special seal with the FERC. And access to that information has to come through the FERC. We can't provide that access because of Patriot Act restrictions. But there is a process that is laid out for how you can request that information from the FERC.
Okay.
Do you have any more questions, Bill?
No,
Okay. All right, Greg, I have a question. If we could just go through a couple of these slides real fast. On page number, or on slide number 10, we see the Duck Creek Road show back up. Can we get, the last time you were here, you said that that wasn't gonna happen, and in the final license application, it actually shows that it's paid. And that came as quite a surprise to me, based off of our last interaction. Is there a reason that's there, or?
The reason why that Duck Creek Access Road appears is because of it's an emergency access route. If for some reason the Steptoe Access Road is inaccessible, whether fire or other reasons why, there needs to be a separate emergency access route that would be down the backside. And that is shown, still shown on there as an emergency access only. It's not improved, it's not widened, it only provides for the emergency access out of the area if necessary. Now, the FERC and/or, the county may come back and say there is nothing that we can allow here, and we may have to find another emergency access route that would be possible. What we had to consider is that the single access route from the Steptoe side is not a purely safe condition. If I've got workers that are working up there for some reason and something happens, we gotta get them out of there, it's either gonna be a helicopter or them climbing down the mountain. And I would prefer to have an emergency access route on the backside.
And I guess I understand that it was just, the impression after the last meeting was that we weren't gonna be in the Duck Creek Basin, and now we're back in the Duck Creek Basin, so that was the question. The second question, and I see you have it later on, is, about landowners. I've been contacted by plenty of them, concerned about things happening. You said you mailed out that Exhibit G to all the affected landowners that the Gentile line goes through?
Yeah, we sent that out to both the directly affected landowners and other stakeholders and adjacent landowners.
So what's the process, I guess, you're following the corridor, but what's the process of I guess, reaching an agreement, or what's the process when it comes to putting your Gentile line where it's at, when it comes to these landowners?
Well, obviously the landowners have primacy, and we have to speak with and work out whatever access deal we can with them, and that's our responsibility to do that. The majority of the lands are on public lands or on BLM lands, and because we've been able to reduce the size of that right-of-way corridor and skirt the edges of many of those parcels, we think we have a compelling reason why that, coupled with whatever consideration they find acceptable, is likely going to be the brew of the day. We also, by the way, we actually looked at where the proposed structure locations were, so that they would would be at the edge of fields, or they would be out of fields, and they would be completely away from where the activities that are taking place on those landowners' parcels. So the structures themselves are one of the other considerations that we actually applied.
All right. And then I had another question here a little further into, I apologize, I got to scroll through your, on page 16, this is probably the biggest map we've seen, of the hydrogeologic, the studies that you've done so far. Can you explain the rings around the pump stations and what those mean, since on our slide we can't quite, it's a little blurry, so I'm not sure what the rings mean around each one of those. I assume those are the wells going south of the project.
The rings that are around those production wells are the range of the transmissivities that we use as a part of the analysis. The drawdown rings will draw down no more, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it seems like to me it was 10 feet within those rings if the transmissivity is between the low end of the range that has been determined and the high end. So if it's the low end of the transmissivity, obviously the drawdown would be at the larger ring. If you have a high transmissivity rate, then the drawdown would be within the range of the inner ring, the green colored ring. So that's actually a visual representation of the difference between the minimum and the maximum transmissivity rates for the drawdown. Obviously, once we do the hydrogeologic testing, that will narrow that down to determine what the actual transmissivity for the alluvial is.
And so I can't read it, it's just blurry on our copies. What is the feet of the drawdown that you're representing in those rings?
If I remember correctly, it's no more than 10 feet, and I'll have to look that up, to be honest with you. It's not something that's on the top of my fingers. Okay.
Let's see, there was one other question I had, and I apologize. We can talk about that with Jeremy on that one. My other big thing, and I was one of the big pushers in putting this on the tracking list, and that's the flood analysis. On your front page, the picture, I understand what you're saying, and I did find it in Exhibit F, to the extent that was available. My issue is you're building a 163-foot dam with 4,000 acre feet of water behind it, and quite honestly, there's 23 families that live below there, below where your water would flow if the dam broke. So I understand that it says that it meets the criteria, but it would really be, it rests some people assured if we would know. I mean, yes, my place is below that. I would, in my opinion, 5,000 acre feet or 4,000 acre feet come washing down. I have some worries about that. And so that's what the flood analysis, I guess that's what I was after when we started this tracking list, is a visual representation or at least an idea of what that flow would look like. Does that make sense?
Well, Sharon, I will tell you there is two things you should take away from this. One is that the work is not done in terms of the review of the dam design, and that there's a dam safety, an independent dam safety review that has to be completed for the design. It's a 100-year design, it has to meet the 100-year design criteria. And secondly is the reference in here is only referencing the amount of freeboard requirement for both maximum 100-mile-per-hour winds that would be whipping across the surface of that, plus the infiltration, the precipitation rates based upon worst-case rain events, and whether or not the freeboard would be designed well enough to be able to prevent an overtopping event. So that's all that's saying is that the analysis says that there is an adequate freeboard for those two kinds of conditions. That doesn't say that the dam safety analysis is complete. In fact, there will be even more analysis based upon the preliminary design. and I agree with you, it would be catastrophic. It would be something that I would, I can't even imagine the consequence of that. And Chairman, just as a point of reference, I went to high school in Northeast Georgia, and a year after I graduated from high school, the upper reservoir that was providing energy through a pump house, the dam failed, and there were 26 people that I knew that died as a result of that failure of that reservoir that occurred during a severe storm event that occurred that an earthen dam that gave way. I am particularly sensitive to what you're talking about. I can't guarantee you that there's no way that could happen. But I can tell you that there is a series of dam safety analysis reviews that have to be completed in order for, not only for everybody else to be satisfied.